Go to the top of this one. I'll see if that's going to be easier to process. Well, how are we doing for numbers?
Good. We're pretty much all here. Not all, but pretty much all.
Probably turn something on so we can hear.
Yeah, right.
Okay, one more time, sorry. I didn't realize that we had turned off all the speakers in the room, so. Much better. Lola, how are we doing? Do we have most of the people we're expecting, or?
We do. And we're past 6 p.m., so I'd say go for it.
All right, well, I'll start off by saying good evening, everybody, and thank you again for joining us tonight. So that's, second class, we're getting there. One of the first things that I did want to talk about is trying to arrange a good day or good time, excuse me, for us to do background checks for everybody and take photos if you don't have a photo that you would like used. If you have a good photo of yourself that you want to put onto your little badge, and turns into a very, very tiny photo, so it doesn't have to be anything fantastic or fabulous. It's but I do try to let people know, hey, we're going to take photos, so that way you can either send me a photo, or when you come to do your photo, take a minute to do your hair, because I've been yelled at plenty of times for not giving people the opportunity to do their hair. So if you, and we can do this in the next couple of weeks, and it doesn't have to be specifically before the class ends, but hopefully shortly within or after the class. I don't know what everybody's work schedule is like, so I could do, I could pick a day like next Wednesday, and actually before I say that, let me look at my calendar, my work calendar. Yeah, so next Wednesday is pretty great. For example, next Wednesday morning and or Thursday morning, I could be here all morning, or I can do evenings and afternoons as well. And that way we could, anybody could stop by, and I'm at Station 6 right now, which is by the airport in Salem. And if you want to stop by, we can do background checks and or photos. Unless you want to send me a photo, that's totally fine. So does everybody think they would be able to make one of those days? I don't know. No? Okay.
It's hunting season, so my whole family's going to be gone, and I've got 2 babies.
Okay. That's completely fair and understandable. So, and here's the thing is, we're not doing a lot out in the community at the moment with CERT. So we're not in a huge rush to get people their badges. Well, timeline wise, excuse me. So we can, especially if I can get a lot of other people. So Christy, you have one with Center 50 Plus already. Yes, that will count. So that was one of the other things. If you all have a background check for some reason or other, whether it's a license to carry, a school ID, a medical ID, or one that's already with the city, then you're covered. So I heard you say that it's hunting season. Do you have a license to carry that you've been background checked?
I'm actually in the process of doing that. Friday, I'm going to go get my photo, because you have to have a photo, and then I'm going to make the appointment to go meet with the sheriff's office.
Okay, great. So I can also happily just wait for that, because they will, if they issue your badge, then you just had a recent background check within the same amount of time that I would do it. So if I am not opposed to waiting until you complete that, and when you complete that, you can either just send me a picture of it, so we have it for a record that you had a background check and you have a license to carry.
Perfect.
Greg?
Yes.
Does that include fingerprinting?
Nope. It's the background check that we do is actually a very light background check. We basically put in your first, middle, last, your address, your social, no fingerprinting. So if you, and that's, so again, if you have a different background check that you've been fingerprinted for, that covers you.
I've had a background check for the state's child care worker function within the last year, and fingerprinting and background check for a TSA preferred traveler about a year before that. So either of those work?
The first one that you said, Sam, I see your question. I'll get to you in a second. What was the first group for working with children?
Yeah.
Okay. If you have an ID or anything like that that identifies you having had that, then that counts. We'll take that.
What I have is a confirmatory email.
Okay, that works. All right.
Bring that in person, right?
You could send me a picture of it. You could take a picture with your phone and send it to me. I just put things in an official record, so that way we have a record of it somewhere that our volunteers have been background checked.
You're talking about within the last 12 months, is that?
Yeah, that's fine. That's recent enough. Yeah, and for Sam, for you, you're not 18, so we're not, we may not give you an actual badge before, until you turn 18. We can prep everything so that way the day you turn 18, if you've kept up on your volunteer time, we'll just stamp you and run you through, and then you'll get a badge when you turn 18. And we'll probably do a quick background check for you then, but excuse me. I don't know why I'm yawning so much. I'm terribly sorry. I think it's something about seeing.
Need a shot of caffeine.
Yeah. So yeah, Sam, we'll keep in touch, and we'll get you a background check and a badge eventually, but not for a little while. And then for everybody else, if there's anybody that just is taking the class and doesn't want to do a background check, just let me know. We will still give you a CERT certificate that says you completed the class, but we will not give you a badge. And that's pretty much the only difference. And we will not send you emails that say like, hey, volunteer for this or come join us for this. That's just purely part of the program that we do based on the fire chief's recommendations and the way he works through the program. So
We do have a couple of people in the class who have already said that they do not want certification. And if that's the case, you do not need to worry about this part at all.
correct. So you don't need to worry about background checks or photos. Purely, I will give you a certificate at the end of the class. It says you took the 21 hours of CERT training. 21-ish these days. Yeah, you know, it's that you took the CERT training, but we just won't give you a badge at the end of it. And that's totally fine. That's, we do that almost in most classes, actually. We do that fairly regularly. But again, just taking the training, becoming more prepared, becoming better prepared is definitely something that we always appreciate people doing. Other than that, let's take a trip over here. Otherwise, for the city of Salem, and one of the other big things that so first off, if you have a background check, you can send me an email, you can text it to me, anything like that, a photo of your IDs that have a background check associated with them, whether it's your license to carry, student ID, or excuse me, like a teacher ID that you work in the school system, a medical ID, or something that says you've had a background check in the last 12 months. And those, I will take all of those as a record. If you don't, so I guess, depending on how many people are actually in the class, if you don't have one of those, then we can have another conversation offline. And you can let me know when is a good time to either meet up with you, and I can do it at just about anywhere that there's Wi-Fi. I have a secure VPN that I can click into, and we can submit the background check online. It takes 3 to 5 minutes and a photo. Or I can be here next Wednesday morning from 8 a.m. until noon. And if you all can make that work, that's cool. If not, so I don't want to just come sit here if nobody's going to show up. So I guess this is a time where if everybody can let me know, you can say something in the chat. And so anybody that doesn't have another form of ID that would need a background check or want a background check, can you just tell me in the chat box when next week would work for you? Just even pick any day, and I'll try to make it work any day. So I'll give you a minute to do that.
So all of my selfies of myself or me on a kayak, would one of those be okay?
I suppose you could just take another one with your phone now and send it this way, or you can wait. All right, Lisa, Wednesday at noon. Okay. Also, if you're a volunteer for any other organization, like Marion County CERT or any of the other counties, or even the Red Cross, if the Red Cross, I forget if the Red Cross does a background check. Terry, do you remember if they do?
I don't know.
Okay. I can check and see what the Red Cross has for their backgrounds. So if you're a volunteer anywhere else, we can take a look at that. So, okay, Wednesday morning. All right, so I will be here. I will come here at next Wednesday, and I will be here at 8. I'll be here bright and early in the morning at probably about 7 o'clock, or excuse me, 7:55 for an 8 o'clock start time, and I'll be able to start doing background checks and everything then, and that should help there. So that is, let me get the actual address real quick. So that is the address, and I will probably either wait outside or be close to it. So you will need one over here. Okay. Good to know. So I will be here Wednesday morning, and if anybody can't make it or needs a different time, you can either let me know in the chat. I'll be here all night, or you can send me a message, either email or on my cell phone. I'll put those in the chat as well. All right. So one other thing that I always make sure that I take a minute to address. Okay. Thanks, Jay. Is carrying firearms is not part of the CERT program. And this is, I know people have the license to carry, they have right to conceal carry. I personally have my license to carry and conceal carry in most situations, but one of the big things that we focus on in CERT is staying within the scope of CERT, because if you're operating under CERT capacity, you're also covered and are a CERT volunteer, you're actually partially covered by the city's insurance. The city and the policy that we have, carrying a firearm, concealed carry, et cetera, open carry, is not part of our CERT program. So we identify it as if you are carrying your firearm and you are injured, you're technically not under CERT duties. And that's really just part of the city's policy for volunteers and the CERT program. So if you choose to carry in a disaster type environment, please don't put your CERT badge on. Please continue to help people, but don't put your CERT vest and badge on and identify yourself as a CERT member if you are carrying a rifle or open carrying a firearm. It's not part of the program that we work with. And if you can all see Terry, I think he still has his camera on, but he's laughing pretty hard over there. Correct. So as Terry just brought up as another good point is, in our CERT program here for the city of Salem, we have no law enforcement authority. You can't put your badge on or put your vest on and badge and start trying to arrest people or detain people or enforce anything that is outside of our scope. Again, we try to stick to the scope of CERT, which is, includes some first aid, all of the other stuff that we do in the class. We try to stay within the scope because that's what's been approved by our insurance company and what the city does and what the fire chief wants in his program. If you choose to join another county CERT program, such as Polk County, it is technically run through one of the police departments. I think it's through the sheriff's department, technically through the sheriff's department. They allow and they spend time training people to do traffic control, and they have people volunteer for the parades, and you are able to help direct traffic or close a road during a parade as directed by their staff. If you do that, you are operating as a Polk County CERT member and not a City of Salem CERT member. You may have to go to their additional training or go take that additional training with them. You are welcome to. You are welcome to join those other CERT programs, whether it's Polk County, Yamhill County, Marion County, Lynn County. You can join any other CERT program that you want. There's even a Kaiser CERT, which is run through Marion County. But again, most don't do anything related to law enforcement. In the City of Salem, we fall under the fire department. We do not have anything related to law enforcement. So please don't try to identify yourself as law enforcement or any type of enforcement. That is one thing that we do work with the police. We do assist in events. For example, in the eclipse, we did have CERT members that were helping control some traffic in very direct, kind of specific points, especially related to the pedestrian bridge going from West Salem to across, because that was something that we had identified as a potential emergency vehicle access route. So we had CERT members participating there and helping control that access. But again, if you are a licensed to carry member of society, just don't put on the vest. That's really kind of what this comes down to, is you can't carry a firearm and identify as a CERT member. And I know everybody has the right to carry. If you do, just take your vest off, don't identify as a CERT member. I'm not gonna fault you for that if that's how you choose to do, how you choose to operate. So, and that is kind of the big points that I really always need to hit on, and just communicate that from the city, that you are, when you operate as a city volunteer, firearms are not part of our volunteer program and the CERT program. Other than that, does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns, want to talk about anything, think about any wild things about how we get prepared? I know we're pretty early in the class, and if you have any questions, especially as we get to the last class, I'll be around for the rest of the classes too. So we should be able to answer any questions, comments, concerns. If you have any of those big scary world questions, or what's what, or what's the city do for all of these things, feel free to ask them. You can throw them in the chat. You can send me a message. I just sent you my number and my email, and I'll try to get back to you and give you answers to that as soon as we can. So other than that, I will actually, unless anybody has a question right now, I'm going to hand it back over to Terry, and we will get rolling with the rest of the class.
Okay, and I should be back online. Okay, so, and just in addition to what Greg was just talking about, it does occasionally come up in class. People do ask about that. And we always tell you that there's no room in CERT for firearms of any kind. The reason for that is because we got our hands full trying to do the greatest good for the greatest number. If you were to encounter a situation where it seems quite dangerous and you would say, gosh, I ought to be armed if I'm here, and you're trying to function as a CERT team member, the simple answer is pack up and go somewhere else where you can do the greatest good for the greatest number without putting yourself in that kind of danger, because we never want our CERT team members to ever be hurt in any way. And that includes being in a situation where you've got a lot of people who are causing trouble. If you see somebody looting a store, that's not what we do, and just don't interfere and don't put yourself in danger, because we need you to do the greatest good. And if you become injured in some way, you're no longer part of our solution. So that's the main reason for it. And on the national level, CERT has nothing to do with any kind of law enforcement action. So we really don't have the need. I'm not trying to make a personal statement as about what you should or should not do in your own personal life by any means. But when we're functioning in CERT, we've got a scope of practice, and that's what we're going to try and teach you in the class. So with that out of the way, then we're going to move into Unit 2, which is the CERT organization. And I wanted to start with this picture. Hopefully you can all see that, where you see all these people wearing red hard hats and red vests, and we've been telling you get something that's green. And since I believe probably everybody can see me tonight, you can see the green of my shirt. This is the national CERT color. So it then begs the question, why are these people wearing red? And I will tell you that the CERT program exists in a number of cities, including Portland. And I believe it's operating under the control of the Portland Fire Bureau. I'm pretty sure that's how they identify themselves. And they wear red. And you ask, well, why is that? Everybody else is green. Salem is green. Why is everybody else red? And that's because the program up there is not called CERT. It's called NET, which stands for Neighborhood Emergency Teams. They're the same as us. They have the same training. They take the same class. But because another organization already has the acronym of CERT, and depending upon where you are, it could be CERT or SERT. The CERT program that we're involved with will switch to the Neighborhood Emergency Team name, because like in Portland, for example, CERT is their SWAT team, and they just don't want any confusion. So they call themselves NET. Why they go to the red vests, I have no idea. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. But I just wanted to explain why this picture that is on the screen shows all these people in red instead of in green. So please, for Salem, if you're going to get into CERT, get a green vest, green hard hat, that sort of thing. And if you're really stylish, you can get a nice dark green raincoat. Greg has turned off his camera, so you can't see him laughing. So I'm going to start scrolling down through this. I'll hit the high points of this. I'm hoping to get into the first chapter of medical, which is chapter 3 or section 3 in your book tonight. I don't know how far I'll get, but we'll see. Please read this section, because I don't want to sit here and go through page by page by page and talk about everything, but I want to hit the important stuff. To start with, the CERT program is based on the Incident Command System, which is ICS, and you can go to FEMA's website and you can take the ICS 700 and 800.
You can also take 100, 200.
Yeah, you can also take 100 and 200. They're listed as classes: ICS 100, ICS 200, ICS 700, ICS 800. And in fact, the CERT program has an ICS designation, and I honestly should know what it is, but I don't recall. But you will find it on their list of classes. These are all free to take. You can take them online. They're home study, self-study. If you complete one of those classes, print off the certificate and get that to Greg, email it to him. Eventually, it'll work its way through the system, and you will get CERT, what we call recert hours. Once you're given the ID card, and I know that we use the slang term and refer to this as a badge, but they don't look anything like a badge. They're a rectangular card laminated with the CERT logo and your photograph, and it has a signature on it of yours and also the either Greg's or the fire chief's. So it's an ID card, but it does look kind of official. That's why we refer to it as a badge. So once you get that card is good for 2 years, and then it needs to be renewed. And what we ask is that you get 8 hours of related training every year, so that you get 16 hours over a 2-year period of time, and you'll get your badge renewed. Now, you can do that by retaking the class. You can do that by attending when we actually start having them more regularly, although they still do take place. The neighborhood meetings, the different CERT groups will have a quarterly meeting. If you attend all the quarterly meetings, you'll rack up the amount of hours necessary. You can take classes from the Red Cross was mentioned. You can take all sorts of FEMA classes, anything that's related to emergency preparedness or emergency response. And we're fairly broad-minded as to what that would amount to. We'll give you recert hours for that. So we do encourage you to continue the education and learning the skills and practicing those skills. Once again, once we get past this COVID-19 set of restrictions where we can actually get together in person again, we do occasionally have practice exercises where we have a mock disaster and we have people playing the victim and other people who are the emergency responders. Let me go through all of the steps, and that really helps to put all of this together. What you read in the book and what you listen to me talk about, that's all well and good, but ordinarily when we have a live class, what I tell people is once you get to the final exercise, you're going to learn more that night than you have in the previous 5 or 6 days that where we've sat in class. It really helps to do things hands-on. It makes everything makes a lot more sense. So the CERT structure, basically there is a team leader. If you have not yet watched the CERT in action video, you will see how they choose the team leader. Usually the default position is whoever gets there first is the team leader, but you can by mutual agreement decide if someone has more experience and you want to hand it off to them, that's fine. Or once you've been on shift for enough hours and you want to step away, remember you're volunteers. Then someone else hopefully has shown up and they have experience and you can hand the baton off to them. Document that, simply say, you know, team leader A is whatever your name is off shift and you're handing it over to team leader B, who is whatever that person's name is. You put that down in your log and you move on. We more or less try to function in some sort of a mirroring of the military chain of command. You know, we're down in the trench, and likely comparatively, the highest rank you're going to see in a CERT team amongst yourselves is somebody who might be equivalent to a sergeant, because any firefighter, no matter who they are, they show up, they're way above us. And so we're going to do whatever the firefighter tells us. But you've got the team leader who is at a central location, and then he's sending out people, as you see in the video, and that team leader appoints someone to be the leader on site. So you've got a nice chain of commands. You've always got somebody who's trying to stand back just a little bit, keep the broad view of what's going on, and they can control the other people, send them in to do tasks. Ideally, we're using those radios if they're available and operational. If not, you might have to use a runner who's going to be sending messages. That would be one of the very rare tasks in CERT that you would have someone perhaps do by themselves, because they're just carrying a message. They're not actually doing any other task. They're not rescuing anybody. They're just having to pay attention to themselves, make sure they don't trip and fall down, or make sure they're only looking out for themselves and carrying a message. That's something that a single individual could do in CERT. And in fact, I believe you see that in the video. They actually, you see them send somebody off by themselves because they're not really going into a dangerous situation. And communication is always the first thing to collapse in a disaster. One of the hardest things to maintain. In the video, it looks like you can get a whole lot of stuff done in 15 minutes, but in reality, it's going to take quite a while. So just kind of keep that in mind. Like I said, read all this stuff in depth. I'm just hitting the high points. The incident command system, this is how the fire department works. This is how the police department works. This is how FEMA works. This is how virtually every government agency that actually does stuff, this is how they work. There you have, if you've got enough people, you're going to start breaking things up into, as you see on the chart here, the operations section chief and I don't know, intelligence investigation section chief. For us, what that means is people who are just going out and assessing damage. You've got a planning chief, logistics chief, a finance. That's going to be at the city level. They have all of those people. And you would really like it to be super high tech, and you got this great command center and everything. And in reality, it's a big room with a bunch of tables and little place cards that say what each person does. But they know how to do their job and they get the work done. So you've got a bit of a flow chart here that shows you how it works. and we mirror this. So the team leader would be like your incident commander on site. They're only going to be controlling 15, 20 people that are CERT team members on a good day, assuming that we can get that many together in one spot. We need about 10% of the city's population to be trained as CERT team members for an ideal situation. That's what we'd really love to have. We have about right now 1% of the city's population trained. So we've got a long way to go. And word of mouth seems to be the way to really get people to take this class. And so we do encourage you, if you like this class, please tell your friends, your family, your neighbors to think about taking this class. You can learn an awful lot. But realistically, anybody who's taken the CERT training, as at our current strength level, we're probably going to, each and every one of us is probably going to be a team leader and running a crew made up primarily of what we call emergent volunteers, well-meaning citizens who want to do the right thing and they need a little bit of guidance so that they don't go into a dangerous situation and get themselves injured. So in reality, that's what it's going to be. I will take a moment to say, because it popped into my head, there are sister organizations to CERT. The most important one that we're going to be concerned with, if you see them, because there is an organization, there is a group here in the county. Sometimes they're a little more active and a little stronger than other times, but it's called Medical Reserve Corps. Medical Reserve Corps is generally made up of medical professionals, but they also have need of people who are not necessarily medical professionals for the same reasons that we need them. They need people who can operate a radio. They need people who can take the documentation. All of that kind of, what do you want to call that? It's clerical kind of stuff, really. I mean, it's an important role, an extremely important role, but you don't necessarily want your doctors and nurses who are going to be there to try and treat people who need help to also have to be doing all the book work. So you will find people who are not medical professionals. Ideally, and the Medical Reserve Corps has indicated that this is what they would like here in Salem, is in the event of this earthquake, they will show up and set up a field treatment center. I may not be able to call it a hospital, but a field treatment center. They would like to be close to an active CERT team, because we are going to go out looking for people, finding them, transporting them back in, and then we can hand them off to the Medical Reserve Corps. That would be the absolute best case scenario. So there are other sister organizations to CERT that all fall under the umbrella of Citizen Corps, which then higher up the chain is FEMA. So, but for our purposes, for this class, for CERT, the one to know about is Medical Reserve Corps. If you hear about them, they're a good organization and we really could use their help during the earthquake. So,
Gary, if I might comment too, one of the things that the Medical Reserve Corps does is when people sign up is suggest that people take a CERT class. So just in case any of you are sitting here going, oh man, I should have signed up for Medical Reserve Corps, you're still going to refer you to CERT class. So it's a good place to start.
Yeah, they do have some outlines here that they're talking about how many people you might have in your CERT group. They used to just say it takes 20 people to make an active CERT group. Obviously, the more the merrier to a point. You get too many people showing up, especially ones that aren't trained or they're very, very rusty. It can be a little bit of a logistics issue trying to manage a team that big. And so you have to start relying again on that concept of chain of command. So they have some scenarios in here to figure out, how you would deal with some of these things. Some of these might be worthwhile. It said, you need additional flashlights to continue your response. That's going to be a logistics issue. You're going to have to try and figure out a way to find some and also who you're going to send to go after them, and document everything at every step of the way. They talk about you have a down power line at the designated first aid site. Well, pack up and move, find someplace else. You're obviously not going to be dealing with that. You got how are you going to deal with somebody smelling gas? Well, when we do the fire section, we will talk about how to shut off a gas meter in that hazmat section. That will be in chapter 6 in this book. Batteries for the portable radios are dead. Again, that's a logistics issue. You're going to have to take an assessment of what your needs are. This is a situation where you really need to engage your brain. So if you've got a lot of chaos going on around you, which is exactly what you can expect, and your task is to try to bring some sort of order to the chaos, and you've got shortages. I need flashlights, we need batteries, we need fire extinguishers, whatever it is. Try to make a list of everything that you need, and then start dispatching your people to try and find that gear. And having an organized thought process. Instead of saying, oh, I got to have flashlights. So you send somebody, run out and grab flashlights, and they come back. And then, oh, well, yeah, but they don't have any batteries. Oh, okay. You go see if you can go find some batteries, and then they come back. And the next, in the meantime, something's burning and you don't have any fire extinguishers. So you see things can go off the rails pretty quick if you don't stop and think about it. If you ever have an opportunity to watch the Salem Fire Department do their tasks, their daily jobs of fighting fires or responding to a medical emergency or traffic accidents or anything like that, one of the things that you're going to note is the firefighters do not run. They walk. They always walk, and they appear to be casually strolling down the street heading towards some big disaster. That's the way it looks to the untrained eye. But in reality, they know what they're doing. When they get there, they're going to do an awful lot of good things, and they don't need to run for 2 reasons. It doesn't really get them there significantly faster, and it removes the risk of them tripping and falling and becoming injured in the process. So that concept of you're actually faster when you're working a little slower because you're not in a panic. So that's a big deal. They talk about there's a fire from another neighborhood moving towards your neighborhood. That's situational awareness. You've got to stay on top of that and make sure that if you have to evacuate, move your crew someplace else, that may be what you're going to do. If a fire from one neighborhood is moving towards your neighborhood, I promise you, CERT team members are not going to put that fire out, and they're not going to fight it. There's one that says there's a dog seen wandering near the first aid station. Unless it's a pest, leave it alone. We're not dog catchers. Again, use your brain, figure out what you need to do. But a news crew has arrived with a camera to film your activities. Try to dissuade them from that politely. You always want to pass them off to, at the very least, whoever's the team leader, and ideally off to the city's public information officer. Let them deal with these guys because if they're going to come in and they're trying to get some really, really sensational images and quotes and bothering people while you're trying to save lives and trying to make things work better, they're just a hindrance. Ideally, it would be nice to say these people are conscientious enough they're not ever going to get in the way, but I don't know that that's going to be the case. But it's not really our task. Just send them away. We got other stuff to do. You've got hysterical neighbors demanding help. When we get more into the medical thing, we'll talk about why the ones that make the most noise are probably the ones that you will deal with last. You've got issues like, is it starting to rain? What kind of shelter do you have for your command post? Do you have some sort of rain parka? In the videos that Lola and I made, where we unpack our CERT kits and show you the contents of them, one of the things that both of us carry are very lightweight rain ponchos. In Oregon, that's a big deal. So if you, again, think ahead, and this is why it's really important, I think, to look at the websites that sell CERT kits and other emergency preparedness supplies. Go out and look at that because they have a list of contents of what's in there. Just read those and then say, oh, do I have that already? Or can I get that? And we're not talking about spending tons of money. The rain poncho that I have, I think I paid $1.50 for it because it's disposable, but I've never used it, and it's in good shape, of course, because it's in this little protective pouch. It'll be there when I need it. It's not something that I use all the time. I have a rain suit at home that's much bulkier if I need to do that, to do some work. But in CERT, you know, I just don't want to get wet. Your helmet will also keep the rain off of your head. And it's the reason why my CERT helmet has a brim all the way around it, as opposed to the baseball cap style hard hats, because I like to keep the rain off the back of my neck. It's just about personal comfort. You've got, here's a good one, number 12 on this screen. Too many people are coming to the team leader to ask questions. Well, you've got potentially a couple of issues, and that is maybe people are just, everybody's coming to the one person, and you're going to have to delegate some of that work to someone else. But also, you tend to have too many people coming up wanting to help at any one time. Our previous emergency manager had responded to an actual emergency disaster scenario, and they had 3,000 emergent volunteers show up at one time. Everybody wanted to help. Well, that's too big of a number to try and manage. So what you start doing is saying, well, I need X number of people right now. That's this group. And then you turn to these people and say, can you come back in about 4 hours? And then the next group, can you come back in about 8 hours? And then can you come back in about 12 hours? And that way you have a rotating shift of people who will be able to do the work without being overly exhausted. And everybody feels like they're contributing, they're helping. That goes a long way to their mental well-being in a disaster. Reports, community damage, next block. Okay, so we're going to start covering all of this stuff as we work our way through the tasks. The CERT mobilization, again, please read all of this, but I'm going to tell you basically how it works in Salem. If it's, in fact, Greg mentioned manning the footbridge over into West Salem at the time of the eclipse. They needed to keep that open to make sure that in case there was an emergency where an ambulance had to get across, and for some reason the two bridges going across to West Salem were jammed full of people who would stop and watch the eclipse. We didn't know if that was going to happen, but we had to be prepared for that. Obviously, you prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So a number of us were manning that footbridge with radios and our CERT vests and rocking, you know, talking to people and making sure that the road stayed open, the footbridge stayed open, and we could also close it to foot traffic if necessary, if we got the order from the city, so that an ambulance could run across. Turned out we didn't need to do that, but we were there and we were prepared, okay? Those kinds of circumstances, the city will contact us and say, we need volunteers. That might be doing that sort of task. That might be, as we have in the past, manning the warming stations that the city opens up when the weather starts getting cold, like it's beginning to this week. You have to take a class to learn how to do that properly, be certified for that. But the city will ask for help. In the past, they have asked people to come down and fill sandbags in case we're expecting a lot of rain and might be flooding. Those sorts of tasks, always the city will ask us to volunteer and come down, and you will get research hours because you're helping out. Which, by the way, the city will give you research hours if you log the time, if you are raking leaves away from storm drains. That makes the city very happy when you do that. So happy that they will give you research hours just for raking leaves. Put your green vest on and go out and do a good job. But yes.
Just going to say there's no requirement for hours this year.
Oh, yeah. And Greg reminded me that for this year in 2020, the city has suspended the requirement for getting extra hours because of the COVID-19 situation. They're just giving everybody a grace period. However, in a real emergency, meaning the earthquake, first of all, you are not going to need the city to tell you that there has been a big subduction zone earthquake. promise that you are going to know that it happened. So consequently, you can self-activate. You need to remember that you will need to, at the earliest reasonable convenient time, let the city know. If that means that you can have somebody who's operating a radio who is contacting the city, let them know at some point. They will want to know that information. They don't need to know it right away. It's not super critical for the city to know that while the rescue operation is going on. But at some point, you have assumed the responsibility of letting the city know that you activated as a CERT team member in this massive earthquake response. And then eventually you will turn in all of your documentation. That's really, really key. That documentation that we turn in can translate into literally millions of dollars in recovery funds because we have documented all of the good things that we did. So it's very important. At the back of section 2, as a matter of fact, there are sample CERT forms. You can look at those and you can make copies of them. If you were to buy that Right in the Rain field operating guide that I talked about, they have samples of them. Now, the booklet that you would, it's a little spiral notebook, is about the size of this. There's my hand. So that's about the size of the book. Obviously, it's a very small piece of paper, but you don't need to utilize that form as a form. You need it as a master copy. And you can take a blank sheet of paper and make a handwritten form that is just good enough. They'll turn all those things into the city. The only thing we ask is, if you are a physician, please get somebody else to write it out so that it's legible. You know? Because it will eventually become something like a legal document. They will transcribe all of those things into their documents and their forms that they need. But as long as you have a sample of the form and you have something to write with and something to write on, and I personally would recommend, you can use lined paper if you like, or plain white copy paper if you like. I do recommend pencils in your CERT kit and some good erasers, because invariably a ballpoint pen, the ink's going to dry out in it, and then you're going to have a stick that really accomplishes no purpose. So just a personal observation there. So they continue on talking about the on-site size up. It's a continual process. You have to make sure that you understand what's happening at that particular site and is it safe to go in. They have the 9 steps. I'll cover it once. It shows up throughout the course, but gather the facts, assess and communicate the damage, consider the probabilities, what's likely to happen. Keep in mind that there's going to be aftershocks. That's the biggest probability. And I'm sorry?
3 to 5 days of aftershocks.
3 to 5 days of aftershocks, yeah. I think that's a very conservative estimate that Greg just threw at me. I will make mention of the fact that in the 2011 earthquake in Japan, they had in the first 2 weeks about 3,000 aftershocks. Some of them were very small. The largest aftershock was a 7.5. So it's not really when is the next aftershock going to hit, it's when is the earth finally going to stop shaking, because it disrupts things and it takes quite a while for everything to settle out. To give you an idea of the amount of energy that is released by one of these subduction zone earthquakes, the earthquake in Japan in 2011 did 2 things that you probably didn't notice, but they are measurable. One of them is our day got longer. It slowed the Earth's rotation by a fraction of a second. And that doesn't seem like a big deal. The other thing is that the Earth's axis tilted 10 inches. Now, it takes a phenomenal amount of energy to move a planet the size of ours. So it's going to take a while for things to start settling down. So there's your probability section. Assess your own situation. Are you in danger? Do you have the training? Do you have the equipment that you might need? That sort of thing. Establish your priorities. We eventually, when we get into the medical portion, we will start talking about triage. And triage is not just about assessing someone's medical condition. Triage is something that you can do all the time. So you're establishing your priorities while you're triaging the tasks that need to be done. What's the most important one? What do I have to do? Obviously, maintaining life is the most important one. We never want CERT team members to become injured. Safety, 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 very important. And then you want to try and save as many lives as you possibly can. And we're going to try and teach you some of those skills. You make your decisions based on what you've assessed so far. Here's a real key one. You develop a plan of action. Well, the phrase that works really well is, first of all, plan your work and then work your plan, meaning stick with it. If it's not working at some point, then back up, gather your crew, come up with a new plan, discuss it, decide this is what the new plan is, and then everybody sticks with that one. If people start saying halfway through, this isn't working, I'm going to do it my way, the whole system collapses, and you don't have any organization, and you don't have any efficiency, because then you just got a bunch of individual people running around doing their own game, and that doesn't work very well. So that's the last one. Evaluate your progress. Is this working? If it's not, reassess and redo it. Again, it's actually faster to do the task by taking a little bit of time up front rather than just barreling in and trying to just jump into it without a clear plan of action. It's very, very important. Gathering the facts, they do hit a couple of things. The time of day, the day of the week, the season of the year, for example. You know, if it's 10 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday and it's in July, you know, are you likely to find anybody at any schools? No, because school's out there on summer vacation. If it's a Sunday and it's not COVID, you know, Sunday morning, well, you might expect to find people in churches, that sort of thing. So you can ask those sorts of questions. How will that affect? What weather are you dealing with? Is it excessively hot? Is it very cold? Is it rainy? Is it very, very windy? That would be a terrific game to have an earthquake and a windstorm at the same time. If that was going to happen, it would have to happen this year because 2020 has been just that kind of year. The construction of the buildings, you have to do what we call a lap around to assess the building. Is it safe to go into for CERT members? Remember, we're not professional firefighters. We don't have their level of training. Are there hazards? Is there hazmat? We'll talk more about that in chapter 6 with the fire. But are there hazardous materials involved? We'll discuss how you recognize that and what you should do. When you assess the damage, there's a form for that in CERT that you fill out that form so you can turn it in. But you're also going to use that form so that you know what it is you're doing. And you will see something like that in the CERT in action video. So they've got all these things that express all of these steps in the CERT evaluation process, the size up, they call it. But this one, the thing here on the screen, rescuer safety is paramount. That's the whole point behind CERT, is we want to do the work, but we want to keep the CERT team members safe. We don't want anybody to get hurt. Remember the 100 rescuers in Mexico City that died trying to do a good job. They're trying to do a great thing, a very humanitarian thing. And God bless them for doing what they did. But 100 of them died because they went into situations that they weren't trained for and it was too dangerous and they didn't recognize that. So they have, if the damage is heavy, in other words, the building looks like it's going to collapse at any minute, especially with the aftershocks that you know are coming, you know, listen to that little voice in your head saying, don't go in there. And sometimes that may be a difficult choice to make. There may be somebody in here that you can hear calling for help, but it's too dangerous to go in. You're going to have to keep somebody there, perhaps, let them know that we're going to try and get professional responders to come in and do the rescue. But I promise you that the Salem Fire Department does not want to go into a rescue situation and also have to be rescuing CERT members or uncovering their remains if they were in a very bad situation and they were killed. They want us to help, but they don't want to have to rescue us. So they will appreciate the fact that we stayed back when it was too dangerous. If the damage is moderate, if it's light, you know, again, you're going to have to use your best judgment. But I will tell you that site-built houses are very difficult to get them to come down. And generally speaking, a house, a wooden frame house, could take an awful lot of damage, and it's not really at risk of collapse in most cases. There are exceptions of that, of course, but they're pretty resilient buildings. They may not be viable as a dwelling anymore, but you know, those sorts of buildings can probably be searched. Brick buildings, there are a number of brick buildings in Salem, and most of them are very old, and they are not built to any kind of earthquake standard, and most of them, in fact, are unreinforced masonry. Those are horrendously dangerous to deal with in an earthquake scenario. So keep that sort of thing in mind. They show you this chart: light damage, moderate damage, heavy damage, what you do, you know, what the hazards are, what you might be able to do, that sort of thing. So please go ahead, as I said, and read that. And then the big one, section 4 of this one, documentation, documentation, documentation. There's a form for everything in CERT, and you have samples of it in this document, this book. So you're going to have to consider where the area is that you're going to search. As you see in the video, they talk about the community center is the place most likely to have the highest concentration of victims. So that's where you're going to do the most good. And then where are you going to put out your treatment center that's nearby but far enough away that it's safe? And then are you going to be able to transport those people more easily based on where you've put your treatment center? So you've got to keep all those things. And then you may be setting up a more in-depth medical center, medical treatment center, where you're taking people to, if necessary. You may have to set up a morgue. We'll probably be talking about that a little bit more. I don't dwell on it too much, but it's all in the book. So please read all that. That's why I stress reading the book as well as sit there and burn your evenings listening to me. So, and write everything down. The documentation flow, they detail that. Here's some samples of these forms, so please look them over. They all have a header, your personal resources, assignment tracking log. This would all be done at where your team leader is. You keep track of that. This is all that documentation that's proving that we did the work that we did as a CERT team, and this is the sort of thing that the city wants us to turn in at the end of the event, which could be weeks. You may be taking 2 or 3 reams of paper to them if you're a busy enough team. They're going to welcome all of that. The city loves paperwork. So you've got a communications log if you've got a radio operator, which hopefully you will, but if you're doing it with a runner, you've got somebody who's probably going to be your communications officer. They're going to be keeping track of all these communications. One of the big ones is to make sure when people show up to help, you check them in, and then try and get them to agree to and actually come back at the end of their shift and check out, so that you don't feel like you've lost anybody. They have general message forms if you need to use a runner and send a message to a team out in the field. So do take a look at that and keep those. And like I said, if you get one of the CERT field operating guides, it will have reduced size copies of these things. So there are additional materials. They're going to talk about these things: the equipment inventory, general messages. These are all just forms that are all, each one of them is very important. And that's why they include them in the book. I'm glad that they did. Like I said, all you need is one good copy of these, of each form, and a bunch of blank paper, a bunch of pencils, a bunch of erasers. Does the trick. So kind of scroll down through this very fast. I don't really want to spend a lot of time talking about each and every one, because you can look them over yourselves. And that takes us to Unit 3, and it's 7 o'clock. And so I'm going to give you guys a break, and myself as well. and we'll meet back here at 7:10, and we'll pick up on and start going through Unit 3, starting with the part 1 of the medical. All right, I'll see you back here in about 10 minutes.
You can adjust that seat however you want.
The counter that we have at the new location here is the most faster. It's too low to stand up, and it's too high for a regular chair. So we have these tools that are like this one, adjust up.
Yeah.
And we end up sitting there because I do occasionally get up and stand, but I don't stand as much as I used to now because the counter's too low. And then I have to bend over to reach and write something. Then I sit, then I have to end up hopping, run out of the house and get parts and move around.
Stop and go, stop and go, stop and go.
Yeah. And last weekend, my wife had me work about that. So. Oh. Let's see. Getting some work done.
I am honestly trying to get all of the badges done. For the classes. As in all things I should have done a while.
Yes.
So we heard from him, we know where he's, I haven't heard from him in a while. I know he was involved in fires and using animals. Friend of mine, fellow CERT team, best friend to stay with us for a while. He did that too. His house, in the high school. They had some three horses. He showed up. Get rolling. So. Yeah. So, and I know that's what Alice doing too. I don't hear from him too regularly. I said, I don't know quite where he is. His mindset is right now. He's really looking to leave the state. I know that that's for he and his wife. Liberal leanings of the government in Oregon. Conservative.
Yes.
It is to me too. It's take quite a bit to get me a cut on.
Yeah.
Hmm? Open the big box.
No, I was conversations about substances to brand, how it's still the ones readily available, what the cost, location, you know.
For me, it was the fact that it's the semi-automatic version of the well, looking back, I realized one of the actually, but firing it's right isn't necessarily strong enough. So I'm a hard driver. Russian implemented myself.
And you're talking about 760. Yeah. It's just good. It's
That's a premium. That one is one.
okay.
That's the place. That's
That, John, you had me shoot this one.
Yes.
Really? You thinking about it last night?
I went to the, I was about 20. Just see how far I want to take me through chapter 3. And if I do that, I'm sailing along pretty good. It didn't take near as much time.
In person. Ola's doing a great job of answering the questions that are in the chat. So,
Okay, it's about 10 minutes, so I guess looks like nobody's dropped off the screen here. So, okay, we will pick up with disaster medical operations part 1. And again, just like everything else in this class, I'm going to hit the things that I think are important in here. Please read these chapters. If you haven't done them yet, that's fine. Go ahead and do please read them, because there's a lot of very good information in these books. That's interesting. I never noticed that before. This appears to be a mock car made out of PVC tubing.
wow. Yeah, as I look at it, I see it.
I'm just trying to realize, what is this thing? It looks like some sort of a horse trough. And then I realized, no, it's a car. Wow. Okay, assisting disaster medical operations. Well, in CERT, there's a good chance that we're going to be on the front line. That's the way that the city actually looks at us, as the first responders in a major disaster. Ordinarily, the fire department can handle everything that comes down the pike. We're very well served by the crew that we have here in Salem, both by the police department and the fire department. They're very dedicated people. They're very well trained, and they do an excellent job. And ordinarily, they don't need us. But for the situation that we're talking about here, the likelihood of everything being overwhelmed is an absolute certainty. The ordinary system is going to be so inundated that they're not going to be able to respond. So that's something very important to keep about. Number one, keep in mind, I mean, number one, you're not going to be able to call 911 because likely all telephone communications are down. And then number two, even if you could get 911 on the phone, they're not going to have anybody to send you because they're already out there answering a lot of calls. We're talking about in a city this size, it is very likely that we're going to have in excess of 10,000 people injured in some manner or another that need help. And that may be an extremely conservative number. It may not be. It's hard to say, but everybody being 10,000 people being injured all at the same day, how are you going to get a fire department of how many?
Hop on real quick. Oh, I can't hear myself. All right. Nope. Yeah. All right. So real quick, one of the things that I always talk about when I talk about disaster preparedness is managing expectations and understanding what our community faces. So to begin, as Terry said, you know, the city will be overwhelmed. I can tell you that. The city of Salem has about 170,000 residents. We'll see what the census says here in a few weeks, but so we have 170,000 residents. We know about 60,000 people commute into the city of Salem every day, and about 30,000 will commute out. So depending on the time of day and what's going on. We then also have about 40,000 people in the unincorporated areas that are also serviced by the city of Salem in some way. So pretty quickly, we get up to about 270,000 people. And then if you add on pets, pretty quickly looking at 400,000 lives in the greater Salem area. On duty at about any given time in the city of Salem, we have about 50 police officers, about 40 firefighters, and about 20 contracted EMTs. So just over 100 first responders on duty at any given time in and around the city of Salem. Now, cumulatively, we have somewhere close to 450 to 500 first responders in some form or other, which is, you know, that's pretty great. But even still, 500 first responders for 400,000 people. If you just look at the odds and numbers, it's not ideal. That's why we really encourage people to take training and to learn some first aid and learn and have a kit, have a plan, understand what it'll look like, and have a little bit of expectation management, so that way you can be prepared to help not only yourself, your family, but really start getting to help your neighbors. I spend a lot of time talking to employees and other people that work in and around the city and state agencies, and talking to them about kind of the expectation management of, you're a member of this community. You have the capability and understanding and even potentially some medical know-how that when everything goes sideways, we hope that you are prepared for it. You can take care of yourself and your family, and then you can start helping out in your neighborhood because you represent the government in some way or other. And people are going to look to you somehow. Hopefully it's in a positive way, or just look to you for guidance on, hey, what are we doing here? So I spent a lot of time talking about the city's plans, the way we work through that stuff and everything else with our employees. But just so I can set that expectation and help Terry with that, it is pretty likely that you will be on your own, or you are going to be part of the initial first response, especially in your own neighborhood. And I'm done.
Okay, so yes, that is exactly what we can expect to do. The CERT team members are going to be operating semi-autonomously for a while. Hopefully it's a shorter period of time rather than a longer period of time, but it takes an organization the size of FEMA responding to a disaster this big, which potentially can reach from roughly the California state line up to the Canadian border. That's the entire stretch of the Cascadia subduction zone fault. It does not always rupture along the entire length of the fault. It's about 700 to 800 miles, but sometimes only a portion of it goes. And so that would limit the area. You may be able to travel far enough north that you're out of the damaged area, or it might be the north end goes and down south. It's not going to be as bad. But if the entire thing goes, you're looking at that distance from the state line of California to the Canadian border, Vancouver Island in that area, and also from the coast, heading east of us anyway, probably roughly towards, by the time you get to, I don't know, halfway to Bend, you're probably just about going to start getting out of where the heavy damage is. If it's a 9.5 earthquake, which is generally the worst case scenario at the fault, which runs anywhere from 50 to 200 miles off the coast. Here in Salem, we would probably experience about a 7.5, but again, for the same 4.5 to 5 minutes, and it's going to do a tremendous amount of damage. So a lot of streets are going to be damaged. You're not going to have a great deal of mobility. You're going to be working in your own neighborhoods, working on the people that live around you, a couple blocks away maybe. So it's going to be, it could be a pretty rough time for a while. And that's why ideally, we need to have a good 15,000 or more people trained, whereas we have about 1,500 to 2,000 that we've trained, and not all of those people are active. Some people have moved away in one form or another, and other people just kind of, they're trained, but they don't actively participate all the time. So anyway, so treating life-threatening injuries. On the medical portion, there's the big three. There's an acronym for it. We call it RPM, which is respiration, perfusion, and mental status. That's the technique we use to assess somebody on these life-threatening conditions. Obviously, breathing is number one, bleeding, and then are they going into shock? Those are the three killers that we have to deal with as CERT team members. So the very, very first thing, and they list it right here, is approaching the patient. So I will talk about that a little bit as to why this is so important. When you approach somebody that you want to try and give some medical treatment to, you have to announce yourself. And by that, I generally mean you should say, I'm an emergency responder. I have some medical training. May I assist you? You have to ask the question. If they tell you no, you may not touch them. You have to respect their decision. If they're competent to tell you that they don't want your help, don't do it, because if you do, you're breaking the law. You're actually committing. If you approach too closely, that can rate as assault, and if you touch them without permission, that's battery, and you will not be protected. And I should take this moment, because this has reminded me of it. There are a couple of laws in place to help protect CERT team members in a volunteer situation. Greg mentioned that when we're functioning as a CERT team member, we are actually covered in part by the city's insurance. If we become injured doing what we're supposed to be doing in the manner we're supposed to be doing it. But we're also protected by a couple of important laws. One of them is the Volunteer Protection Act. The other one is the Good Samaritan Law. And what these laws are in place for is that if you could be very easily sued for trying to help somebody, nobody would do it. It would become too much of a risk, and you would have floods, tornadoes, windstorms, and nobody would show up to help, because it would be, people could say, oh, you touched me, I'm suing you. or you did this, or you didn't save this person's life. Well, the Volunteer Protection Act and the Good Samaritan Law are in place to protect you in those circumstances. If you stay within the scope of practice, which means the things that we teach you in this class, the things that are in the book, if you stay within that, then you cannot be sued for attempting to assist someone in a disaster. Because as hard as it is to believe, occasionally the government does have a bright idea, and that is, we need to have good-hearted people who will step up to the plate when it's needed, and we have to protect them. And to my knowledge, these two laws have never been successfully challenged in court. I say successfully. Any case that's been brought up has been tossed out because they fell within the protections of these two laws in order so that people will volunteer and do the right thing. Very important. So this is the first step in staying within the scope of practice. You have to approach them, make sure they can see you, and make sure they can understand you, and ask them for permission. So if they give you permission, great. Then you can talk to them, tell them what it is you're going to do, ask them questions about what was the mechanism of injury, where does it hurt, what's going on. They can tell you an awful lot if they're conscious. If the patient is unconscious, they're not able to answer, then you are covered by what's called the reasonable person rule. And what that says is that a reasonable person, looking at the situation, knowing that they are injured and potentially could die from those injuries, would want someone to help them. So if they're unconscious, there's an implied consent. And this applies not only to the CERT team members, but it's exactly what happens with the professional responders, the fire department, and now we have the contracted EMTs with Falk running the ambulances around. If you're conscious, they will ask you, can I help you? And if you say yes or no, they'll respond appropriately. If you're unconscious, they will go ahead and help you. If you are conscious and say no, they'll stand around until you pass out, and then they will assume it's implied, and then go ahead and take care of you. So that's kind of the way they do it. But it is important that you follow that rule and follow it carefully. I don't know that you necessarily need to give your name per se. It says in the book, you're welcome to do so, but indicate the organization. You say, I'm an emergency responder. Say it's Salem, I work with the Salem Fire Department. You can identify yourself that way. If you just say the acronym CERT, most people in general are probably not going to understand what it is you're referring to. So I prefer just using the phrase emergency responder. So you do that, you've requested the permission to treat an individual. They do talk in here about the implied consent if they're unconscious. Respect cultural differences wherever possible. And all medical patients are legally entitled to confidentiality. The HIPAA rules apply even to us. So you're going to keep some records, but you don't have to put their name on there. When you're documenting what you've done with a patient, you may do a patient form. If you can remember back in the day when hospitals used to have a clipboard at the foot of every bed, and doctors and nurses would come in and make notes on there. That's the patient's chart. Well, in our case, if we create a patient treatment record, that we would put that with them. So you might put their name on there if you can identify that, but then that goes with that patient. We don't keep it. We don't need that information. We don't need to know who they were. In our documentation that we turn into the city, what they're interested in is how many people we treated and how did we assess them and where did we send them to. So you say we sent them off to Salem Hospital or wherever they set up a field hospital, or if it was the National Guard that set one up, you just put down there, National Guard Field Hospital, and if they have a number designation or whatever you can put down on there. But that information that goes to the city doesn't need to include what was wrong with them, just how we assess them. When we get into talking about the triage portion, which is actually not in this book, but I will talk about that. You just put down how we rated them. Are they critical? Are they delayed? Are they minor injuries. That's what the city wants to know. How many and how did we assess them? So we're not there to keep a super detailed record about every individual. That's not our job. It doesn't matter. So here they're going to talk about controlling bleeding. I don't know why that's before. Where is it? Huh, let me look. Obviously, I'm not quite as familiar with this new book, but we'll take it in the order that it comes. Although I will say that breathing is job one. You want to make sure that that person is breathing, but we'll cover that. I'm sure it's in here. So control bleeding. So if someone's bleeding out, you've got to take care of that. They're talking about if they're bleeding steady or if it's an arterial bleed, which every time the heart pumps, it shoots some more blood out. You've got to do something very quick. And Lola and I did a short video on how to apply the bandages. So if she has not yet, she will give you the link. I see her nodding her head.
They got that one.
They got that one? Okay, so do watch that. They're only a few minutes long, and it shows you how to very quickly improvise a bandage and how to apply it. It should only take you a minute to do that, and then raise the limb above the heart so that helps. They talk in here about the percent of blood loss. The relative portion of that is if they lose too much, no matter what we do, they're probably going to die because we don't have all of the gadgetry and knowledge and supplies of a trauma center. And sometimes they lose 30 to 40% of blood volume. They're probably, it's almost debatable whether a trauma center can save them. If they lose more than 40%, they're probably going to pass away very quickly because there's just so much blood loss. There's nothing there. There's not enough fluid to continue to bring the nutrients and the oxygen to all of the vital organs, and you start having internal organ damage. It just cascades. It just gets worse very, very quickly. So they talk about this. You can read all of that. They talk about arterial bleeding, which is the really bad one. Venous bleeding, it will flow. They talk about capillary bleeding. They mention it in here, and if you've got time, yeah, you can clean that and dress it, and that's fine. But generally speaking, capillary bleeding will stop on its own. And so it's not that critical that you deal with it right away. They do talk in here about applying direct pressure. That can be done by hand. Ideally, you would want to have hopefully someone with you who can stay with that patient applying that direct pressure. They explain in here how to do it. There should be, I don't know if there is, but the various places, you know, up under your arm, up in here, there's one there. There's the one inside the groin on each side, the major, to pinch off the major arteries. Now, it used to be that in CERT, we did not ever recommend utilizing tourniquets, but that has changed in the last few years because tourniquet technology has come a long way.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, yes. Positive side effect of a very nasty thing called war. But the tourniquets are much wider than they used to be. And so this allows us to utilize one. Greg has actually got one in his hand. He will probably bring it over here and I'll show it to you. Okay. So this is a tourniquet. Now you can see it's almost like a belt, almost as wide as a belt. It has Velcro strap on it, and it has attached to it this bar to wind it up and take up the tension. So you cinch it up as snug as you can with this Velcro strap. Once you've done that, you start winding this up to take up the tension. And then it has places on here to catch the little bar so that it won't unwind. The advantage to these as compared to the old ones is it's so much wider that it doesn't create the crush injury that old tourniquets, which were very, very narrow, used to do. And so you could, before use a tourniquet, you would pretty much guarantee that anything outbound of the tourniquet was going to have to be amputated in order to stop the bleeding, and you wind it up and it would crush everything and it would starve everything for oxygen. And eventually you're going to start, gangrene is going to set in and they're going to have to amputate that limb. And so that's why we didn't do it. But now they have these much higher quality units that you can buy. They're not all that expensive. Carry them in your kit if you like. And if you have to apply one, it doesn't by nature destroy the tissue. And so they are, can be used now. And they have instructions in here on how to use them. Lola, the place in Woodburn is, do you remember? The place to buy, the place that makes them, buys them?
I don't. I'll go out and find it.
You'll look that up. There is a place in Woodburn. They have some excellent products for stopping blood loss. And if you're interested in having that in your personal kit, by all means, the stuff's reasonably priced, and I'm not a salesman for them, but they have some great products, and they're made right here in Oregon. They're made in Wilsonville. So a good source to increase the capability of your first aid kit that you would have at home for your family. Pardon?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Quick comment for me. Peanut gallery over here. There are several places in and around Salem that you can actually buy tourniquets as well. And Quick Clot and Israeli bandages. For example, Greystone Tactical, which is in Salem on 12th Street. Sportsman's Warehouse has some now. The 911 Supply that's in Kaiser also has them. But again, the place in Wilsonville is, I forget the name of it. But they, it's a local thing if you want to buy local. You can also buy these things on Amazon, but my one suggestion is when you see them, the windlass that you use to actually spin the bar to spin it tight, make sure it's a metal one, because if you are spinning it and it's plastic and they snap because they're brittle or old, then you no longer have a tourniquet. North American Rescue is a common company that you'll see. You'll see them on Amazon, and you can buy them there and have them delivered to you. And that's just one company that I know that is very reputable. It's the one that most of the military uses. So back here.
Okay. So, and they go in here's telling you that if you can't stop the bleeding by direct pressure, and they say EMS professionals are delayed in responding, well, you can pretty much count on that in the earthquake scenario, then a tourniquet might be the only option that you have. So if you think that's something that you want to add to your kit, by all means. And mentioning the CERT kits, by the way, for those of you who are going to go ahead and become CERT team members, we put this class on for free. All of us who are involved in the program, with the exception of Greg, are all volunteers, so we don't get paid for this. So the city puts the class on for free, and part of the reason they can afford to do that is because we don't charge them for our very valuable and specialized time. But we do ask that you build a CERT kit with the hard hat, the vest, and the personal protective gear at your expense. We're asking you to do that so that you can be a functioning CERT team member with the proper gear. There are other outfits, other locations, other organizations that will put on the CERT class. They charge you for the class, but at the end of the class, they give you a kit. And my personal experience with that is that you get the least expensive product that they can buy, because they get the most kits for the least amount of money. And consequently, you get, generally speaking, to be polite, the lightest duty products, let's say. So, bleeding control. Yes, Lola is holding up the bag.
It's called SAM Medical. SAM.
Thank you.
There's also,
Medical.
yes.
Good.
There's a
You can find them online. They're located in Wilsonville. They have a variety of things that you can take a look at and see if there's any of those items that you wish to add. We're not necessarily recommending that you provide a lot of gear that costs money to utilize rescuing people, other people. We don't expect you to have a $2,000 kit to go out and rescue people's lives. These additional products that you buy, generally speaking, we recommend this for your personal first aid kit at your home to take care of you and your loved ones. But if you wish to have some of this available to utilize on a CERT basis, that's great. We really appreciate it. Please document that if you use any of that when at the end of the earthquake. It is possible that you might get some of that money back. I can't promise it, but it is a possibility. So they describe in here fairly well. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would also recommend, if you plan to have any of these stop the bleed products, that you really should take a course to go along with it. There's some good few hour courses, because it's not as easy as just sticking it on there and everything is okay. I'm sorry. Thank you.
No, your contributions are always welcome. Okay, so they describe in here in this book on how to use the tourniquet. And as Lola says, if you take one of the Stop the Bleed courses, they demonstrate that. You get to practice with some tourniquets and see how they work. They do show a picture of one here. Looks like it's a pretty good one. These really come from experience in the field. There's two things that have come out that were both developed here in Oregon. I can't say specifically about the concept of the wideband tourniquet, but these are a result of a battlefield experience. So there was a company here in Oregon, and I think it might even have been the SAM people, or it might have been someone else here in Oregon, that realized that the shrimp, can you call shrimp harvesters fishermen? I guess, I don't know, shrimp fishermen. Anyway, difficult job, and it's rough on their hands, and they would get a lot of cuts, harvesting the shrimp. But what they noticed was they almost never would bleed, or at least not hardly any at all. It's just a very surface amount of blood, even if they cut themselves. Somebody finally started to look at that, and they found that there is a product in the shrimp shell that is a natural clotting agent. And they started processing the shrimp shells and making these, what you call quick clot, or that type of bandage that's impregnated with this stuff that will cause the damaged areas to clot up and stop bleeding. Some really good people have come up with some great stuff, and the military uses it, and it's now working its way out into the civilian world for disaster response, and also for the people who are involved in mountain rescue and people who do wildland medicine, that sort of thing, where somebody might be injured that way out in the pucker brush, and something like this can help save their lives. Very, very important. These are really good products. And it's also, you can get smaller versions. I'll just mention this real quick. You can get smaller versions of these in just gauze pads that are impregnated with this clotting agent. This is a great thing for people to have around their house if they are on blood thinners. The people who are on blood thinners tend to have a bleeding problem, and this stuff can really make a difference. You get a cut that to an ordinary person is no big deal, but to somebody who's on a blood thinner, that could be a dangerous situation. And having some of these on hand is a great idea. So you might consider that, again, for your own personal kit. So recognizing shock. This is the one I will talk a little bit about. Please read that. What I'm going to say probably isn't necessarily written out there, but we have a acronym that, or a little phrase we use. It's the number 30, the number 2, and the words can do. So when you're trying to assess someone, whether or not they're going into shock, you want to look at their breathing. Are they breathing 30 breaths per minute or more? If they are, you would consider that person to be going into shock. And when they're breathing that fast, they're panting. The number 2 is we're talking about perfusion, and this is a little trick you can do right here on yourself. So take one hand, take a finger. They originally used to teach us to press on the nail. Personally, I like to press on the pad of the finger, but you squeeze your finger between your thumb and forefinger of the other hand. And what you're doing is you're pushing the blood out of the end of your finger, and then let go of it and watch as the white spot where the blood's been pushed away turns your normal color again. That's called perfusion. You're looking at how long does it take your body to push the blood back into where it belongs. You can use the tip of the finger, you can use your lip, you can use your earlobe. There's a number of different places you can do that with. And just see how fast the blood comes back. And you're sitting at home and presumably you're comfortable and warm and everything's great, and it's going to be almost instantaneous. 2 seconds is an inordinately long time for perfusion. You squeeze somebody's finger, and if after 2 seconds the blood hasn't run back in, you're going to notice that that's going to seem very strange. So you've got 30 breaths per minute or more, greater than 2 seconds of perfusion. And the last one is mental status. So the RPM is the other acronym. It's respiration, perfusion, and mental status. 30, 2, can do. So you want to check their mental status and kind of see where they're at. Ask them if they know what happened. Talking to them about, are you hurt? Does it, where is the pain? What's going on? How did this happen? Those sorts of things. And if they seem like they cannot really follow simple commands, that's another good thing to do. Asking them to, take a hold of, say, 2 of your fingers in their hand like this and squeeze it, or take a pen, hold it up, ask them to track the pen with their eyes like you're giving them a DUI exam. They're real simple commands. If they can't do it, there's probably there's a strong likelihood they're going into shock. So if they fail any one of these 3, if they're breathing too fast, if their perfusion is too long, or their mental status is not good, any one of them is necessary to, we assess them as going into shock, which means that they're critical. So if they weren't breathing, you come up to somebody, and I'm sure we'll get to that in just a moment, but if they're not breathing, and we'll show you how to reset the airway. If they're bleeding heavily, or if they're going into shock, any one of those 3, we're going to assess them as a critical patient, and we're going to tag them red. So when they're going into shock, typically you want to make them comfortable, probably lay them down, raise their feet up a little bit, because you want most of the blood to go to the torso where all of the vital organs are, and also to be able to circulate through the brain. When the blood pressure is low, if somebody's lying flat, the heart has a much better chance of circulating the blood than if they're standing up. The posture is a good way to treat low blood pressure by laying them down. But as I say, you should probably want to raise their feet up a little bit, make sure that they're higher than the heart, make them comfortable. They talk in here about maintaining body temperature. This again refers to what is the weather of that particular time. If it's very warm, you're going to, obviously get them out of the sun and make sure that they don't get overheated, because one of the things that happens with shock is that it disrupts the body's ability to maintain its proper temperature either way. So you need to kind of figure out what's going on with them. And it can be tricky maintaining body temperature. You don't want them to get too hot. You don't want them to get too cold. It is possible, and I have personally seen it, somebody who was at risk of going into shock because they were getting very cold on an 85-degree day. That particular person was diabetic, and they were having a pretty rough time. And the blood sugar was so low that there was not enough fuel to warm them up. So they were actually treating that person for hypothermia on an 85-degree day, which seems on the surface, you say, how could that be? But it is. So maintaining the body temperature, you have to keep track in your head what's going on with this person, and you don't want them too hot, you don't want them too cold. So if they're wet and you're trying to deal with the potential of hypothermia, as we're talking about right in here, keep in mind that hypothermia is an issue almost any time of the year. It doesn't matter. And if they're wet, that just makes it all that much worse. If it's 55 degrees outside and their clothes are soaking wet, somebody can start going into hypothermia. So in a place, in some place, you insulate them from the ground, because the ground will just suck the heat out of them. Wrap them with dry layers, shield them from the wind, that sort of thing. They do have further on, they'll talk about hypothermia. So the control of the breathing or bleeding, this is an exercise. So past that, we're talking about opening the airway. So the first thing in my book, when you approach somebody, you want to make sure that they're breathing, because without the air, that's going to kill them pretty quick. The second one, obviously, is the bleeding. You've got to check for that. But this one now, they're going to talk about how to open the airway. And unfortunately, this new book does not really have the pictures that we used to get. But generally speaking, the technique that we use is called head tilt, chin lift. Usually what happens when you run across a patient who's unconscious and they're not breathing is that their tongue has completely relaxed inside their throat and it's blocking the airway. The tongue has become a very limp muscle and it's blocking the airway. This would be the thing that causes people to snore typically at night because of that, what's going on. So what you have to do is you've got to straighten things out so that the body itself will pull the tongue out of the way and open the airway. So they do this by what they call head tilt and chin lift. So you would put one hand underneath the chin, the other hand on the forehead, and tip the head back. And in doing so, you're going to pull everything straight in through the throat and the neck area. And this will typically pull the tongue out of the way. And if someone is not breathing because of this condition, once you do this, you'll hear them suck air in, big gasp of air. So if you do this technique and it doesn't work, keep in mind that you're all charged up full of adrenaline and maybe you didn't do it right. So kind of relax yourself and do it again. Reset that airway a second time, try and get that straightened out so that they can breathe. If they start breathing, great. And you'll know that right away because you'll hear it. Now you're probably going to have someone stay with that patient because they are unconscious and you don't want them to lapse back into a situation where they're not breathing. If you cannot, then there is a position which I'm sure that it's down in here someplace. Yeah, it's coming up in just a second. So I'll describe how to do that. But once you've got them breathing, you've got to make sure that they're going to stay breathing. If you've done it twice, the textbook answer has always been, if you've reset somebody's airway twice and they don't start breathing, the textbook answer is you have to move on to the next patient. And remember, you're trying to do the greatest good for the greatest number. And unfortunately, there's always the risk that you're not going to be able to save everybody. Wish it was true, but chances are you might run across somebody that you can't save. So what do you do in those situations? They have what's called the recovery position. So you would want to roll that person into the recovery position. If you've got them breathing, but you don't have anybody to leave with them, lay them in the recovery position, which is you lay them on their side. And if you have a choice, the left side is better. But if you can't, for some reason, lay them on their left side, lay them on their right side. So what you would want to do is, as you lay them on their side, you want to utilize, if you're laying them on their left-hand side, for example, utilize their left arm as sort of a pillow to rest the head on. You're rolling them up on their side and using the knee on the upper leg, pull that forward into a V shape, and utilize that leg and that knee as the kickstand for the bicycle to hold them in that position on their side, and they will stay that way. Okay, so this does a couple of things that are very important. One of them is that gravity does the job for you of pulling their tongue out of the way so that they can continue to breathe. The other thing is that when you got somebody who's in shock, essentially it's not a matter of if they're going to vomit, but when they vomit, and they could be unconscious when that happens. And the problem there is twofold. Number one, they can choke on, if they're laying on their back, they can choke on it, which defeats the whole purpose of trying to get them to breathe to begin with. And second of all, if they do inhale some of that, the stomach acid attacks the lung tissue and they get pneumonia. It's almost a given that that's going to happen. So by putting them in the recovery position, you've got gravity working for you on both scores. One, it keeps the tongue out of the way, and two, if they vomit, the gravity is going to pull it away and they're going to continue breathing and they're not going to aspirate their own stomach acid. So really good technique to use. And personally, if I've reset somebody's airway twice and they're not breathing, I'm still going to put them into the recovery position. If in fact that person has passed, you're not doing them any harm. And if I failed to recognize the fact that that person was alive, I'm giving them every possible chance that I can. And then you're going to come back and check on them later. And you come back and check on them, and they're alive. You did a good thing. So it's a great position to put them into, especially when they're unconscious. But also when they are conscious, but still, it might be a good idea if you can't leave anybody with them to observe them. You have to go and triage other patients. Then at least if they do pass out, they're in the right position, and they're probably going to be more comfortable that way anyhow. So they will talk about that in here. They talk more about practicing the recovery position. I'm trying to remember, Lola, did we demonstrate that on one of the videos, putting somebody in the recovery position? I think we did. No, we didn't. Great.
I think we did.
She's thinking we did. I thought we did. We'll have to look into that. If we didn't, we will do a video of that nature and put it up so that you can see how it's done.
And
It's a really useful tool.
they have the links to all the videos except for the kit dumps, which now I have and I will send out tonight.
Okay. So they have basic first aid care, treating burns. Again, I'm kind of relying on you to read a lot of the detail in here, and I'm hitting the high points on this. So there's different layers of burns: first degree, second degree, third degree burns. There's actually something called fourth degree burns, which are really, really bad. So there's two concerns with burns. Number one, how bad is the burn in terms of its depth of penetration? That's your degrees of burns. The other one is, what's the surface area of the body that has been affected? Because your skin is the biggest organ that your body has, and it is really key to your body's ability to regulate its own temperature. And so when skin gets burned, it's not functioning properly and it won't regulate temperature. It doesn't contribute to that process. So you can have somebody that has, you say, a second degree burn, but it's over 90% of their body. That's really bad, as opposed to a third degree burn that's limited to an area like this. Well, third degree burn is really bad, but it's such a small area that it's probably not going to threaten their life. It's going to make them feel miserable, But so it's a function of the two. How bad is the burn and how large is the burn? Okay. We have to remember that part of our scope of practice says that in dealing with burns, you can only use gauze or some improvised bandage that is absolutely clean as you possibly can, and plain clear water. We can't use, as a CERT team member, we cannot use any kind of burn treatments, ointments, home remedies, any of that kind of stuff, because it's not within our scope of practice. And you want to stay within the scope of practice so that you cannot be sued for malpractice, doing things that are not appropriate. What you do on your own, on yourself or your family, your loved ones, you're not functioning as a CERT team member under those circumstances. You can have all kinds of burn remedies in your home and use those as the situation dictates. One of the problems that you have with a burn is, again, as I was saying, the body's not maintaining its temperature. So you want to watch for that, because again, they're going to go into shock. They're going to go into shock because a lot of body tissue damage and a lot of pain, and a lot of things can kick somebody into shock. If you're dealing with a burn like that, potentially consider it that shock is almost a given. So you're preventing hypothermia. You're trying to manage the pain as best you can, but you cannot give them any kind of painkiller, because we're not doctors and we cannot prescribe any kind of medication, even aspirin. So, and you got to try and reduce the risk of infection. That's where your sterile gauze, if you have it, is where you want to use that. If you don't have sterile gauze, by all means use the cleanest kitchen towels or whatever you can find. Act as a dressing, and then cool the area with clean water. Bottled water is a real great thing because it's sterile. And so if you've got some bottles of water, that's a good place to use that. Depending upon what caused the burn, if it's fire, a heat burn versus electrical current or a chemical burn, or they talk about radiation, but it's not likely that we're going to be dealing with radiation burns. So they have different things that can cause it. If it's a chemical burn, you're going to try and wash that area, rinse that area off. You're not going to scrub, but you're going to flush it with clear water to try and dilute that chemical and get it washed away from the area, so that, and then treat it as you would with a burn. They've got a great deal of information in here on how to do that. The one advantage to this new book is that they have taken out all of the really detailed photographs that they used to have in the old book. The slide deck that we used to use can be pretty disturbing. Remove the patient from the burning source. Burns are a tough one to deal with, depending upon how bad it is. That patient needs a lot of care, and you've got to try and figure out how to get them to a higher level of care as quickly as possible. And that really applies to all of your critical patients, or your red, the ones you triage as red, because they need professional care. They weren't breathing, something caused that. They have bled profusely, and so they've got low blood pressure and low blood volume, and that needs to be treated by professionals, or they're going into shock, and that's the shock alone can kill them. So they have the details in here on what to do with the burns. I'm going to move on from that one. The wound care, control the bleeding, apply the dressing and the bandage. As you'll see in one of the videos that Lola gave you the link on, you can improvise a bandage by taking a washcloth as a dressing, laying that on top of the area that's bleeding, and then take almost anything that you can find, including a shirt like the one I'm wearing, this long sleeve cotton shirt, will make a great bandage. You wrap it around a good couple of times and tie the sleeves into a knot right on top of where the wound is, and you've put your dressing. Improvise a bandage very, very simply. And you can find this stuff in anybody's house anywhere. So if you're treating somebody and they're in their house, by all means, go to their kitchen or to their linen closet near their bathroom probably, and grab what you can to use to save their lives. I doubt seriously they're going to complain that you got blood on their washcloth when it's their blood because they're bleeding out. And generally speaking, anything that we find in a drawer or a cupboard or something like that in their house is clean enough for our purposes. We don't have the luxury of limiting ourselves to sterile bandages. We don't have them. And if we spend the time trying to find sterile bandages, they're going to bleed to death. So we don't want that to happen. And if they've got things folded up in a drawer or in a linen closet someplace, I haven't met anybody yet that takes their dirty laundry and folds it up and puts it away. So it's going to work. It's going to be fine. Use their stuff. Everybody has an abundance of stuff. You find it everywhere, whether it's an office situation or a home situation, there's stuff everywhere. You can improvise. And that's another phrase that we use, like situational awareness. That's hardly an original one. This one isn't either. I heard it in relation to the military, and I thought it was perfect for CERT, and that is improvise, adapt, and overcome. It really applies to what we would have to do in the field, trying to find something that we can use to emulate what it would be great to have if we had it, but we don't. So again, kitchen towels, washcloths, that sort of thing makes a great dressing, and then you can utilize whatever you can find to tie it off with, wrap it around as a bandage and tie it off. I mean, keep in mind that an ordinary Band-Aid that you would put on a tiny little scratch on your finger is the little gauze pad is a dressing, and the adhesive strip is the bandage in the simplest form. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to emulate that on a larger scale to save somebody's life and utilize the stuff. And if you're out in the field and you have to use a piece of clothing, use the clothing from the people that you're treating, not yours, because next thing you know, you're going to be cold and shivering because you don't have enough clothes on. So they've got the bandaging the wounds, and we demonstrated that. You can make triangular bandages and roller bandages out of bed sheets very quickly and very easily. They work just great. The nice thing about bed sheets is that the particular weave that they use on the cloth, it generates its own amount of friction. So when you tie a simple knot in that cloth, the friction will keep that knot from coming loose. So you don't have to tie elaborate knots. You can tie a knot like you're tying your shoe. On top of that, it'll hold, and then it gives you the ability to easily untie it and add a second dressing if necessary, if it's soaking through. And you just keep piling them on. You don't take them off for two reasons. One, if you were to pull the one off that's sticking to the skin, you're going to tear that wound back open again and make it bleed more. And number two, once that person gets to a professional healthcare provider, that person who's experienced is going to be able to look at the number of dressings you put on, and that will give them an idea of how long it took for that wound to stop bleeding. And then they can make a better assessment about how they need to proceed. Did it stop bleeding quickly, or did it take a long time? Or are they likely going to be very low on blood? Gives them a better idea. Now they're going to do their own reassessment, their own triage, but the more information that we can pass on to them by these techniques is going to count. They have a lot of, they talk in here about the rules of dressings. If there's active bleeding, in the absence of active bleeding, maintain the pressure and keep the wound bandaged. They also talk about infection. Now, infection is certainly a concern, but it's not something that we can treat. We don't have any of the medical knowledge, the medical training, or any of the antibiotics or any of that kind of stuff. We're not allowed to use them anyway. So we want to try and prevent it. If you see signs of infection, I would say move them up the ladder and try and get them to medical professionals as quickly as you can. They also have a section in here about what to do in the event of an amputation. And some of this is kind of a best case scenario. You might not always be able to to accomplish these tasks, but if you can, this gives you a nice guideline. Impaled objects. Okay, so the number one rule, and again, please read all of this, but the number one rule to remember about impaled objects is don't pull it out. If you remember the guy from Australia, Steve Irwin, he had a stingray spine stuck in his chest while he was diving. He's under the water, and he pulled it out. Now, it's a very natural and human reaction. I'm not trying to make any sort of disparaging comment about this gentleman. He was experienced, and by all accounts, he's a very nice guy. Unfortunately, what he did not know and could not have known was that that spine had actually pierced his heart. Now, it was small and slender, and his heart was still able to function. But when he pulled the spine out, it uncorked the bottle, so to speak, and he bled to death. And so it's a sad event. It's very unfortunate that it happened, but we can learn from that mistake. And so you never pull that impaled object out. So you have to bandage around it. You can take along whatever, towels, dish towels or anything like that, kind of twist them up into almost like a rope, and then start looping them back around and snaking it through each other until you can make something that looks like a donut. And you put that over the impaled object, and you keep stacking those up until you've got that completely covered. And then you can start bandaging it around it and start applying some pressure without putting any pressure directly on the object itself, and also protects it from moving around, getting wobbled, because you're trying to treat the wound, but you're also trying to make the patient as comfortable as possible. And from our perspective, to get that thing out, you need surgery. And so we want that person to go to a medical professional who can take care of those things, and they have the training and all of the equipment that they need. So then we move on to fractures. Unless the fracture is called an open fracture, or what they used to call a compound fracture, where the bone is actually sticking out, we can't really tell how bad the break is, or even if it is a break. If they're in pain, it could be a severe strain or a sprain. It could be what's called a hairline fracture, where the bone has cracked, but it's not broken in such a way that it's out of alignment or anything like that. We can't tell. So we have to assume that somebody's got a great deal of pain where you would suspect it might be a break. We treat it as if it is a break. You immobilize it. If it's their arm, you put a sling on them, bandage it up, attached, like if it's their arm, kind of bind it to their chest to use their body as part of a splint. Otherwise, you'll have to improvise splinting. And we have a section on that. We have a video that Lola and I did on that. It shows you how to improvise a splint out of cardboard and string or tape, whatever you can find. Again, it's that concept of there's stuff everywhere. We don't have the really cool moldable splints that you'd like to use. So you're going to make it as you can. You can use newspapers, magazines, which there are getting to be less and less of those around every day, but cardboard boxes are getting to be more and more because everybody gets stuff by Amazon. So you've got lots of cardboard, and that makes a great thing. And the other nice thing about cardboard as a splint, which is also true of magazines and newspapers and towels and all that sort of stuff, is that it is invisible to x-rays. So you don't have to, the medical professionals don't have to unsplint the person if we use those materials in order to take an x-ray. Again, that's more comfortable for the patient. And so we want to try and do that whenever we can. Dislocations, again, situation we can't really see what's going on inside of there. We're not medical professionals, so we're not going to do like they used to show in all the movies in the old days, where you just plant your boot in somebody's armpit and give their arm a good jerk and pull it back into position. We don't do that. We're probably going to do more damage than good. I know it's a shock that the things you saw in a John Wayne movie aren't always necessarily true, but I hate to be the one to break that to you, but it's true. So they got sprains and strains. We're going to splint them just like it was a break because we can't see it. We can't tell how bad it is. Eventually they'll get x-rayed and that'll be treated appropriately. In this picture, they actually do show some cardboard, how you can make a splint out of it. You're going to line it with soft materials like towels, blankets, pillows, whatever you can to pad it so that the bony portions next to on your elbow and all that kind of stuff. You don't want pressure from the cardboard box or whatever you're using as a splint to push on that because that's going to eventually make them very uncomfortable. If you're tying making a sling, ideally, if you can put the knot in the middle of their back, that's better. If you have to put it up at the top, make sure you put some padding underneath it because that knot riding on the back of the neck is going to get very uncomfortable in a relatively short period of time. And we kind of talk about that. You can use blankets and towels as a splint and wrap it up. You can improvise all sorts of things like that. It really works. In this case, they show this one with a leg. They're using the good leg to act as a splint for the leg that's injured. It's going to obviously impossible for that person to walk, but in this sort of scenario is probably to splint them up so you can transport them. And then ideally, you would probably resplint that leg with other materials so that the other leg can move around. Also, when we were talking about impaled objects, I apologize for not getting to this then, but if someone has an object impaled in their eye and you're in the field, how are you going to deal with that? Obviously, you're not going to pull it out, but you don't want the eye to move around. So you can take like a Dixie cup and easily cut it to fit the shape of the face around the bridge of the nose and everything, and slide that over their eye as a protection, and then bandage that to their head. Okay, but and that works. It works great. The problem with it is that the other eye is uncovered, and so they can move their eye to side, and when one eye goes, the other eye follows it. So they always track together, generally speaking, on most people. So what you would want to do is then put a cup over the other eye, okay, so that then their eyes are not going to be doing that. And then, of course, the immediate thing that you think of is, oh gosh, I've made this person blind now. Well, before you put the second cup on over the good eye, take a pin or a pencil and poke a little hole in the center. You put that on, they can actually see through that hole well enough to maintain their balance. And actually, if they're walking, they can kind of see generally where they're going. And they will always be looking through that little hole. And consequently, their eyes will not be tracking back and forth. So you can immobilize the eyes and still allow them to see by having a small hole. It works pretty well. So, and then the cold-related injuries, we kind of talked about hypothermia a little bit. Frostbite, unless you're up in the mountains, it's really not an issue here in the valley. It's not really a concern, generally speaking. You can always make a case where it could happen, but generally speaking, it's not an issue for frostbite, which is the freezing of the tissue, usually at the extremities. And if it's bad enough, that tissue dies. But like I said, unless you're up where there's a lot of snow, generally speaking, that's not an issue. Now, if you live in Minnesota or someplace where it gets 40 below zero, there doesn't have to be any snow on the ground, and you can still get frostbite. But hypothermia can be virtually any time of the year, anywhere. Once the body temperature drops to 95 degrees Fahrenheit or lower, you'll start going hypothermic. The shivering is the first one, the first sign of it. By all means, read all of this information here and what the treatment is. Remember that never issue alcoholic beverages to somebody who's got hypothermia. In a nutshell, what it's going to do is the alcohol enters your system and your body has closed off all of the blood vessels, the capillaries and everything to your extremities because it's trying to keep your core temperature as high as it can. That's its natural reaction. When you have somebody drink alcohol, it opens those capillaries up and warm blood flows out to the fingers and toes. And so immediately that person says, oh, wow, that feels so much better. My fingers are warming up. That's really great. But unfortunately, your feet and your hands, your legs, and your arms have become like an automotive radiator. And so that warm blood goes out to the extremities and it's cooled off, and then it has to come back. And so what it actually does is it lowers your core temperature, and it just gets worse. The more alcohol is involved, the worse the process is. 2 drinks is usually enough to cause somebody to be pretty hypothermic. So it's one thing if you've been on the mountain skiing and you come into the lodge at night and you've got, you've changed into your comfy clothes and you're sitting in front of the fire and your feet are cold and your hands are cold and you've got a cup of hot chocolate and you put some schnapps in it or something. That's fine because you're already in a warm environment. You're not going to risk your life, but that's what you do for yourself. In the field, you're definitely not going to give anybody alcohol because it just makes things worse. And then they talk about frostbite. Go ahead and read that. But another issue like we had earlier this summer, heat-related injuries, heat cramps, heat exhaustion, heat stroke. Now you may know somebody that had told you, oh, I was out doing something and I had heat stroke. Generally speaking, if they're telling you that they had heat stroke, they didn't have heat stroke. They probably had heat exhaustion, because heat stroke is a life-threatening condition, just exactly as this says, and it's starting to cook the brain. And usually they have some sort of permanent brain damage if they've actually had heat stroke. Heat exhaustion is like having a really bad case of the flu and you feel miserable and you ache and just, it's awful. And it takes probably 3-4 days to really recover from that by getting lots of rest, drinking fluids, and taking care of yourself and staying out of the sun. So they have all of the things on here, the cool, moist, pale skin and heat exhaustion. In heat stroke, the body has spent enough of its water content that it can't sweat anymore. Again, it's shock. Their body can't maintain their temperature, so they're overheating, and there's nothing it can do. It's spent every trick it has to try and keep the body cool, and it's losing the battle at that point. Very, very dangerous. You've got to get them to, first of all, get them out of the heat. And second of all, you've got to get them to medical care, because if you cool that person's body too much, too quickly, that in and of itself is going to cause them to go into shock, and it could very likely stop their heart. So that's a really risky thing, and that's not something we deal with. There may not be much we can do in terms of true heat stroke, but the likelihood of seeing it is probably fairly low. So the treatment, they have all that information in there. Insect bites and stings, you can read about that. Allergic reactions to bites and stings. If someone has an EpiPen, you cannot administer it unless they ask you to. And then you are assisting them with something that they said they need. The same thing would go with somebody who's having a heart attack and they want to have nitroglycerin tabs. If they ask you to help them, by all means help them, but don't make the decision for them that this is what they need, unless you are a physician. So that's the summary on section 3. And that gets us to about where we were last class, about 20 after. So unless there's any questions anybody wants to ask, we're going to call it for the night. And on Tuesday next week, we will pick up on disaster med part 2. Any questions? Look at that. I've put them all to sleep.
We have
There's not
the
a peep
links
out of it.
now to the kit dump, is what we call them, the dumps from Terry's kit and my kit, and I'm going to send the links out for that tonight. We have a video about quicksand, and we have some psychological first aid information that I'm going to send out. And if there's anybody else who thinks that they didn't get the links for all the other videos, let me know. And I don't see one for the recovery position, so I guess that's on our to-do list, Terry.
Okay, we'll have to make that video, try and get that done before the end of the class. Get that up. If not,
I have a
Go ahead.
question. If you have training in the medical field, such as administering injections, such as for diabetics and stuff, and a diabetic needs assistance, can you go ahead and do that?
If you have some sort of certification that says you are qualified to do that, I suspect that's true. I would be hesitant. If you're dealing with somebody who is a family member, you probably already know about that anyway, and then they're not likely going to sue you for giving them insulin. On a stranger, unless you have the ability to check their blood sugar level, and you have all the knowledge to know exactly what size dose to give them, I would consider that to be a very risky operation. Yeah, if it's a family member, that's different. But if it's a total stranger, I would hesitate to do that.
Okay.
And I'm a diabetic, so that's my opinion.
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of diabetics in the past as a med aid, so I've had training for the insulins, the different types of insulins and the units and all of that, and you know, what to look for in diabetics, how to, yeah, so
Yeah. If you have some sort of a certification that allows you to do those things, that's a different calling. And just like doctors can do a lot more than we can because we're just CERT team members. They have the training and the experience. So I personally don't know that I have a really solid answer for you on that. I would be real leery about doing that on somebody that I didn't know.
okay. Okie dokie.
Anybody else? Nope. Okay. Yep. Thank you very much. We will see you here, same time, same channel on Tuesday. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Hi. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
And I will mute.